everyone, it's Sabrina. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the current issue with exotic animals. Currently, worldwide, there's an estimated 4 million birds, 640,000 reptiles, 40,000 primates, and 350 million fish that are recorded in the trade market each year. And although some of these are bred in captivity, many of them are taken from the wild. As many as 84% of the reptiles are imported into the UK, and they were wild caught. And over 95% of marine fish are taken from the wild environments. This is clearly a risk that is associated with people owning exotic pets, because people are taking them from the wild areas and then selling them. And America is as much a culprit to this as everywhere else in the world. It's currently at this point where people are saying that there are more captive tigers in America than in wild ones in Asia, which is a really huge thing. And most of these tigers are either starving because their owners can't afford to feed them, or they're being skinned, beheaded, sold, or their teeth are being, taken out. And nearly all of the exotic animals are being put through this kind of thing, and they're helpless victims in these kind of situations. There's a TV show called Fatal Attractions where they tried to bring about public awareness about this issue because it's continually rising each year. And they show these owners in these detrimental environments with their animals, and some of them have even been eaten by their animals that they own. And these people they don't see the problem here. They're just like, oh, this is my pet, and we're just happy, and this is how we're living, and everything's just wonderful. But the fact of the matter is that they think that they're helping these animals, that they're going to introduce them to the wild, and that they're going to be okay, and that they're going to just flourish the population. But the fact of the matter is, once an animal is domesticated, they can't be released into the wild, because they're typically overweight, they have a dependency on humans now, and if they're put into the wild, they'll go to, homes and towns and villages and look to the people for food, and then this becomes an issue because they could potentially attack the people if they don't get food. And the other problem is that not many vets can help care for these animals, so they're usually sick, and they can carry diseases. I mean, monkeys can carry herpes, lizards can carry salmonella. There's things like that are just factors that can't be cared for properly by a vet because these are illegally owned animals. And the problem is that owners will even go to drastic lengths, such as taking roadkill and feeding that to the animal to sustain them. And this is completely unsanitary. It can cause a lot of illnesses and can even cause the death of their animal. And parasites can live in these carcasses, which can put the owner and any person that comes near the animal at risk, and illnesses can be passed on relatively easy based on this. The other problem is that people will keep these animals in cages, and that, of course, leads to them becoming obese, muscle issues, bone trauma. If they're in the stage of growing and the cage is too small, they can grow in rather disformed, disfigured, and things of that nature, which is an issue. But the problem is, even if these people, because there's no legal obligation for these people, nobody ever questions their living establishments. So it's never, addressed. And then, there's the ultimate flaw, which comes in when people decide, hey, I can't afford to keep this animal anymore, what am I going to do with it? At this point, people will take their exotic animals and say, I don't know. But the problem is, the media is currently a huge influencer on this thing. They noticed a dramatic increase in sales of clownfish when Finding Nemo came out, so when the movie hype dies down, the owners are like, I don't really want this animal anymore, and nobody really starts caring for them, and they're either left alone to die, or they're given away in the best case scenario. And sometimes these animals are put into the wild by their owners. This makes it extremely difficult for them to survive because they're in a completely, random environment where things don't seem to be in their favor for suitable, living. But there is a problem of the fact that when these animals are put into an environment, they become foreign species. If they're a foreign species, they can eventually change into an invasive species, which is when an animal has no natural predators in the environment to eat it off. So this animal will live in this environment and breed and breed and breed. And eventually, there's just so many of them that nobody knows what to do with it. At this point, the species can take over the area and completely throw it. In the Nile, there's these lizards called the Nile monitor lizards, and in Florida, they have become an invasive species. Now, people were trading them and importing them from Africa to sell them to exotic pet owners. And what happened was these animals were aggressive towards people, and people were like, I don't want this, so they let it go. And then they came into the wild, and they're increasing in number. They can grow to be over 7 feet long and weigh up to 20 pounds. And the problem with this is that female ones can lay up to 60 eggs at a time. This makes it very difficult to lower down their population size, and they wreak havoc on the native species like owls, alligators, fish, snakes, turtles. This is a huge issue for their populations. These animals also have saliva that can be fatal to humans and cause dramatic infections and illnesses if the humans are bit. And there's no natural predators for these animals in the area, so they're continually breeding. And then humans have to come in and say, what can we do about this? So they're trying to put efforts in to bring down the population. But the problem is, when people intervene, it's usually the police, and they don't do this in a humane manner. They'll shoot the animal, and if the owner does manage to survive, they're fined or thrown in jail for the ownership of this animal. And then, it's just a huge issue, because at that point, the animal is killed, and the owner is prosecuted, but the time in jail is usually not long, so the owner can get back out and get more animals and repeat the process over and over again. And the jail time doesn't seem to increase no matter on repeated offenses, so that's another issue. And sometimes these people can even buy their way out, just on bail, and they can just be out. That's horrible. But current research shows that this kind of thing can also be rooted in at a young age, when people are never allowed to have pets, and they're kind of enforced by their parents to just you can never interact with an animal, it's so bad for you. And then later on in life, they're like, well, why not? Animals get to be free, I should be free too. And they see animals as a sign of freedom, so they take animals from the wild and they'll purchase them and raise them. Animals are very helpless, and they see the animals as in need. I was never taken care of as a child, so I'm going to get an animal and care for it to make up for the fact that I wasn't taken care of. That's what they see it as. And then the problem that comes into play with this kind of thing is that now they're taking this animal and they're seeing it as themselves. And so they're saying, oh, this is my baby, and my baby needs care. And eventually, this animal will become ridiculously large, ridiculously abusive, and could potentially harm everyone involved. For me personally, this has been an issue back in my hometown. There is a current, snakehead fish are these big fish. They're not dramatically big, but they can get about this big. And the problem with these fish is that in our area, they're not, a species that anybody knows about. And when they were put into, some people had them, and they grew too big for their tanks, and they decided, we don't want these fish anymore. So they threw them into our lake, and these creatures flourished in the environment, and they grew to be bigger and bigger. But the problem is, when these fish are out of the water, they can survive for 3 days without any water. And they can sort of manipulate their bodies to walk to other water sources. So you have these giant fish, and the solution to kill them off would be to drain the lake, but then these fish would be waddling around. So in an effort to stop this problem, people actually drained the lake, and they found that the fish were still there, afterwards. And that was a huge thing. There was even an instance when a boy was swimming in our lake, because it's a public area, it's where people go during the summer, and he was attacked by one of the snakeheads. And that became a huge thing as well. But in conclusion, I just want to say that owning an exotic pet can be a good thing if you're doing it legally and for the benefit of a zoo or something of that nature. But to own it for your own self-pleasure is not okay under any circumstance whatsoever. Anyway, thank you for listening.